The history of the death penalty in Maryland is a long one. The death penalty was adopted in 1975. It was not until 1994 that the first person was actually executed, and that was John Frederick Thanos, who was sentenced to death in 2 different counties and actually wanted to die. He did not oppose any of his post-trial rights other than his first automatic appeal required by law. Only 4 others have been executed since then. There are currently 5 men on death row, one of whom is for a Wicomico County homicide. 2 men currently on death row who have served the longest period of time since they were first sentenced to death are Anthony Grandison, who was tried and sentenced in Somerset County, and Vernon Evans, who was first tried in Worcester County. Both of these men were sentenced to death in 1983. Since then, there have been constant appeal hearings, post-trial hearings, appeals of those post-trial hearings, writs of habeas corpus hearings, etc., and neither man has yet to be executed. While the law of the state of Maryland leaves the discretion of seeking the death penalty solely to the state's attorney for each county, that discretion cannot be exercised in a vacuum. In virtually every case, the victim of a death penalty eligible case leaves behind loved ones. The Sarah Foxwell Thomas Lakes case is no exception. Normally, after a defendant is sentenced, the victim's family obtains some degree of closure, at least as much as they ever may have after the murder of a loved one. In a death penalty case, however, closure is substantially delayed. The case does not end unless and until the defendant as I file another hearing, another motion or petition filed, the state notifies the victim's representative, as it is required to do so by state law and common decency. When that notice is made, the scab is ripped off the family's wound once again. The grieving and anguish is brought back to the front and center of the family's life, causing turmoil, stress, and sadness. Some families are willing, sometimes even eager, to go through this for the sake of getting what they deem to be a just sentence. Others are not. Since I became state's attorney, I've made a point of meeting with Sarah Foxwell's family to talk about the case and find out what their desires were. And when we were finally approached by defense attorneys for Thomas Lakes and asked if there was any way we could resolve this case without a trial, we were obligated to discuss options with the Foxwell family. We met with them several times, and each time they expressed their preference that the state not seek the death penalty if the state could ensure that Lakes would plead guilty in open court to all of the crimes charged, and that he would receive the sentences contemplated in the plea agreement. The Foxwell family has told me that they do not want a lifetime of anguish and appeals. Due to the extreme stress, havoc, and grief the death of Sarah has caused them, and their need to begin healing from this horrible, despicable crime, and because they wish to protect Sarah's sister, a 7-year-old material witness in this case, they have unanimously requested that we withdraw our notice to seek the death penalty in consideration for the plea agreement placed on the record today. Realizing that despite their feelings, the law does not give the victim's family veto power over the state's intent to seek the death penalty. I also met with the law enforcement community to weigh their concerns and feelings with those of the Foxwell family. I've spoken with Sheriff Mike Lewis, Lieutenant Ernie Leatherberry, and the detectives who worked so tirelessly to find Sarah and solve the case. All unanimously agreed that an attempt should be made to honor the request of the Foxwell family. Because our case was so strong, and because the evidence, both physical and forensic, including DNA evidence, against Thomas Lakes was so overwhelming, we insisted on certain conditions which were as follows. Thomas Lakes had to plead guilty in open court to all counts charged in State of Maryland versus Thomas Lakes, Jr. As a condition precedent to the entry of the guilty plea, Mr. Lakes had to agree to return to the Wicomico County Sheriff's Office to be questioned by detectives from the Wicomico County Bureau of Investigation and truthfully answer all questions asked relating to how, when, or why he committed the crimes charged in the case. The Foxwell family provided me with a list of questions that they wanted answers to, which were provided to detectives and which were asked to Thomas Lakes. Mr. Lakes was brought back to the Wicomico County Sheriff's Office on the morning of Thursday, March 24, 2011, and satisfied the condition precedent. And the next day, I personally gave the Foxwells the answers to their questions. The defendant also had to agree to the interview with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the BAU. The BAU studies pedophiles like Mr. Lakes and uses the information that they glean from such interviews to assist law enforcement agencies in identifying and catching offenders faster. And then the defendant had to agree to the following binding sentences. As to count 1, first-degree murder, the defendant received life without the possibility of parole consecutive to any other sentence previously imposed upon the defendant in Wicomico County or any other jurisdiction. As to count 6, first-degree sex offense, he received a second sentence of life without the possibility of parole consecutive to count 1 and consecutive to all other sentences. As to count 4, kidnapping, he received another sentence of 30 years consecutive to his 2 life sentences. As to count 2, first-degree burglary, he received another sentence of 20 years consecutive to all his other sentences. The defendant can also not profit from his criminal activity pursuant to Maryland law. Given the history of the death penalty in the state of Maryland and the wishes of the victim's family, I reached the conclusion that despite the fact that the law provides for the penalty of death, and that I personally believe that Thomas Lakes deserves to be executed, nonetheless, I do not feel I should force Sarah's family to suffer a life of constant upheaval and turmoil. A death sentence for Thomas Lakes would have been a life sentence for the Foxwell family. It is more important to note that this case was disposed of by way of guilty plea. By law, that limits the defendant's appellate rights to generally 4 areas: jurisdiction of the court, illegal sentence, and incompetency of counsel, and voluntariness of the plea. While I'm not saying that there will be no appeals, I am saying that his arguments on appeal are severely limited by virtue of his guilty pleas. I am aware that this case has piqued the interest and sympathy not only of the citizens of Wicomico County, but of the entire lower Eastern Shore. I am aware that my decision to withdraw the notice to seek the death penalty will disappoint some, but I am confident that my decision is in the best interest of justice. The outpouring of support for law enforcement in this case and sympathy for the family has not gone unnoticed. The citizens of Wicomico County will never forget how so many people came out on Christmas Day 2009, a day normally reserved for joy and happiness with one's own family, to find Sarah Foxwell. I would personally like to thank Davis Ruler, Abby Marsh, Sheriff Lewis, and the Wicomico County Bureau of Investigation for their efforts in this case, as well as Lieutenant Ernie Leatherberry and the members of the Maryland State Police, MSP Homicide. I also want to thank the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, especially Mary Ripple, whose labor was crucial to the resolution of this case. I would also like to thank Dan Spotts, the FBI, and the BAU, and of course, all other law enforcement agencies and personnel: Salisbury Police Department, Ocean City Police Department, Fruitland Police Department, Delmar Police Department, and all of the private citizens who helped bring Sarah home and put her murderer behind bars for the rest of his natural life. At this time, we'll be happy to entertain any questions that the press may have.
Hey, Jennifer and Tom, can you answer a question? Do you guys feel that justice was done in this case? If you would step up to the mic and talk, if you can.
We're satisfied. Completely.
Yes, very
Totally.
satisfied. And again, Matt explained it. Maryland's not going to enforce it.
The death penalty.
They won't enforce it. Why get it?
Jennifer, tell me about when Mr. Lake stood up with his statement. What does that mean?
I really can't comment on that right now. Very shocked
Yes,
that he
shocked.
spoke to us.
Amazed.
Yes.
Nerve to say anything.
It was almost like an insult. I took it as an insult. So.
Do you think he was sincere?
No, ma'am, I do not.
So what happens next for both of you?
Begin healing together as a family, all of us.
Yes.
We haven't had a chance to do that. Now we all need to do that together.
Take care of the children. Take care of the
And
kids.
to make sure that this never happens to another child in our county or abroad ever again.
Do you have anything to say to the community that stepped out and searched for your daughter?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for giving up your Christmas of 09 to bring our baby home.
Thank everybody for
We
everything
now have
that they've done.
closure, and we can all move on, including the community.
Mike, can we ask you a question? There has been some talk. I was speaking with my colleague Steve Hammond earlier today when we heard about the decision here. There has been some question about how DNA evidence in this case was handled. I think there's been some criticism. Could you address those concerns?
Well, clearly, the criticism was irresponsible and very reckless, Don. No question about it. This was a rock-solid case. No public defender, no defense attorney is going to allow their client to plead guilty to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Mike, what's next for you? This has been a long road for you as well.
Lisa, I tell you, it has been a long road, and I'm just glad we have some finality for the family, for our community, and as I said a while ago, there was a lot of hard work in this case by investigators in the Wicomico Bureau of Investigation, the Maryland State Police Homicide Unit, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They worked hard. They worked their hearts out, and they proved they did a damn good job of what they did, and I'm very, very proud of law enforcement. In Wicomico County, Federal Bureau of Investigation and all our allied agencies came there to help us during the 3 days we searched for Sarah.
You're a father. How has this affected you personally?
I think it's affected any parent personally, and certainly will never be the same as long as I live. I don't think anybody will.
Mike, you went up and you lobbied in Annapolis for tougher laws for sex offenders. I'm just curious, I know you've said something about it before, but were you happy with the result, and will that, I don't know, will that make things better? I mean, I'm watching this today, and you had a lot of people clamoring for the death penalty. It's not going to happen. The family doesn't want it to happen. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Don, as our state's attorney, Matt Messerello, said, I, too, personally would love to see the death penalty in this case. The Foxville family expressed their concerns with us. They are legitimate concerns. They were concerns we had early on in the prosecution of this case. I'm happy with the way this case has been resolved.
Amy, could we ask you a question?
I do have
She doesn't
prepared,
wish to speak.
no, and I
She
do
doesn't.
have a prepared statement I'd like to make.
All right.
Please, would you step up and tell us who you are, spell your name?
Yes, I will. My name is Roberta Wexler. I am Sarah's grandmother. I am Jennifer and Amy's mother. I have a prepared statement, and I do beg your indulgence. It's probably going to be about 10 minutes, but it's important. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody involved in securing this justice for Sarah. Wicomico State Attorney Matt Mazzarello, former Wicomico State's Attorney Davis Ruart, all the Assistant State's Attorneys and their entire office, Sheriff Mike Lewis and the entire Wicomico Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Ernie Leatherberry and the entire Maryland State Police, all of the other law enforcement agencies, and